the corrections, I was working still at Sony Music, where I was for 10 years, and I was going to go to the book to an author signing of his, and he just kind of had come off of this thing where they put the Oprah Club stickers on all his books, and he objected to it, and then they had to do another, and so I have an Oprah book copy.
There you go.
As well as, but anyway, I was going to go from work to the signing because I was really excited to meet him, and to and I grabbed it, and then I said, I'm just going to grab, because you have so much music sitting around, I'm just going to grab this Johnny Cash collection. I think he would like that, just if I just gave it to him. Because it was all free, this stuff. I had so much swag, And I get there, and I'm in line, and I give it to him, and he bolts upright. He goes, and he gives me a warm, handshake. And so it was the right thing. But I never was able to parlay it, go in another time and say, I asked the guy that gave you the Johnny Cash collection.
Oh, yeah.
It's
funny, my wife was at
McDowell
McDowell
years
Colony
later.
with him.
What?
At the McDowell Colony, that's that writer's artist.
Yes, and is that the one in Iowa or something?
It's up in
New Hampshire? Okay, yeah.
They were together for a month, so she knows him quite well. But
right.
In fact, it was when he was finishing the corrections.
Oh.
So I have an old galley copy that he'd sent to her, and I'm one of those people that, if there's just too much hype, I tend not to...
A little skeptical.
Yeah, exactly.
More skeptical.
So for whatever reason, it's sort of a teenage rebellious impulse on my part. I'm not proud of it. But I had never read it. And now I realize what I've been missing is I really should have read it then. But anyway.
Yeah. Well,
better late than never, as they say.
Yeah. Do you feel compelled to keep up on current
I try.
Literature?
I come out of... that's my PhD was in German studies because I did it's a very roundabout story, but I spent a junior year in Munich, and so German was one of my languages that I learned, and so I did a lot of literature as part of that training, that academic training, and so for years I also taught a lot of. And in fact, at the New School, I was in for a year. I was installed as the co-chair of literary studies, and so I taught a lot of literature courses, and I still do.
Right.
And
so was Thomas Mann
one of your
exactly.
guys? Mann and Kafka and those sort of those towering figures of the 20th century.
The usual suspects.
The usual suspects. There you go. Exactly. You're recording.
Yeah, that's how it works.
Okay.
So
I only noticed that when you leaned in.
Noah Isenberg, author of "Will Always Have Casablanca," which is out now, and well, we're going to say that because
it's out now.
When I play this, when I post this show, it will be out.
So you're going to post it on Valentine's Day or something, or sometime around then?
Yeah, the first opportunity after it comes out. So, if it's coming out,
Day.
It's coming out what?
Tuesday the 14th, Valentine's Day.
Apropos
that they all come out on Tuesdays. I had no
idea.
idea.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, working in the music industry, we always made releases on Tuesdays. All music came out on Tuesdays
as well. I had no idea. And so it lines up with Valentine's Day, which is that's the hook.
Sure.
So I'm doing something at McNally Jackson that day.
Well, one of the points of conversation is definitely is Casablanca. A romance? Is it a romance, or is it a war story, or is it about there's so many possible
all of above,
what is
all
it?
the above,
yeah, all the above, or is it a redemption story slash what would it be, a story of consciousness and doing the right thing and all? Certainly that more
a conversion story as
well. Conversion
Mm-hmm.
story. Yeah, right. Here's a guy who's maybe his soul, his spirit, his conscience is buried, and it's reawakened through the return of Ilsa.
And you have that great shell of complete cynicism. I stick my neck out for nobody, and I'm only the only cause I'm concerned with is my own, and all that. And
it's a front. It's a front. It's his shell that he's created because his heart was broken. Yeah. So there goes. It's behind that shell is the romantics.
Yeah. And you have that great, I think the 8-minute flashback sequence. That's where the romance is kind of buried. But then that's where it's most explicit in the flashback sequence. But throughout, it's kind of percolating beneath the surface. I mean, from the moment that Ilsa walks into Rick's and you see Sam, the reaction shot of Sam. It's in his eyes. He knows exactly what's coming. And then once she convinces him to play as time goes by, and Rick storms into the cafe, and first hearing the music, and then seeing it's that deep repressed, pain.
Yeah,
the love that went sour.
Right.
And
if we don't tap
jilted at the train station.
Yeah, if you can avoid all reminders of the person that broke your heart.
Yeah.
Just like live without even trying to any reminders at all.
It's total repression.
Right.
Yeah.
How far can you kind of repress it? So it's Let's take a couple of steps back first, because kind of getting ahead of ourselves here. When was the first time you recall seeing Casablanca? Because I can't remember the first time exactly.
I think as a teenager, and I think with my mom.
Okay.
My mom's an enormous fan of the film, and I think as a teenager, I often, that kind of, again, classic rebellious impulse. No, I'm not interested. This is, what middle-aged women watch or something, and I was just wrong-headedly dismissive, pig-headedly dismissive of it.
But it's almost a natural phase, since you're mentioning it, as opposed to the more cynical response, which is it's too popular, so I can't like it.
It's that as well.
Which is it's maybe its biggest obstacle was that for today's ironic crowds, the generation of irony, that I think is where it runs into the most resistance. Is this no pun intended?
Absolutely, no question.
Right,
and that it's funny for someone like me, who had just a few years ago published a book on one of the least known, underground filmmakers, this critical biography of Edgar G. Ulmer, who was, an Austro-Hungarian emigre who came to this country and really kind of trafficked in all of these esoteric genres and sort of down market, production companies and all that, to then deal with, the sort of the holy grail of classical Hollywood was quite a leap.
Was that very intimidating for you? I mean, it sounds like
I don't know. It's funny. You would think it would be, but strangely enough, given the glaring contrast between the two projects, there was almost an organic growth, and it may come as little surprise to you, but the organic growth came out of the experience of exile. And the sort of these refugees or emigres in Hollywood, and that's really where you can track the line, I think, because otherwise, Casablanca could not be more radically different and more radically removed from the kinds of B horror films and film noir and sort of in European kind of basically unknown European low budget pictures that Ulmer was doing in the 50s. I mean, Casablanca is at the really polar opposite end of the spectrum, and yet what links them is this experience of exile and being in Hollywood, even though they were very, very different places. So Ulmer versus, say, Curtiz and all the emigre actors involved in the production. But being in Hollywood during the wartime years and being a German, or at least German-speaking emigre or refugee, as the case were, and needing somehow to come to terms with the loss of homeland and wanting to make, and this was true even for Ulmer, he did for PRC, for Producers Releasing Corporation, which is this bottom of the barrel B movie company, for which he churned out 11 pictures in 3 short years. He did some anti-war films there too, and Casablanca is, there are a number of critics who've called it a terrific work of propaganda. I mean, it is really aimed at garnering greater support for the Allied war effort. And Rick's conversion narrative is all about that. It's all about that move from isolationism to active engagement and supporting the cause and subordinating one's own personal or libidinal urges for something much greater.
One could argue the craftiest part of the film is how things are sort of, subtly gauzed over or hidden or buried a little bit. Just a little, just enough to get by censors, to get by cynics, to get by, that there's a lot going on right under the right under this. There's a lot of subtext going on there, and so
gauze is a good word for it.
Yeah.
I think there is a kind of tissue of layers.
Yeah.
And they're not always, the message isn't always right there on the surface. In fact, it's often not, as you say. Regarding everything from, dodging the Production Code Administration, the Hayes Code, and Joseph Breen and his henchmen, or also, I think, kind of working in that war message, the need for active engagement. That was clearly, I mean, that's what the Office of War Information. That's what they insisted upon. Mm-hmm. But I think that Curtiz and Hal Wallace, the producer, and those who really had a hand, and some of the screenwriters as well. So the Epstein brothers and
Howard Koch.
Mm-hmm. I think in Howard Koch even more. Epstein brothers were, their wit is every funny line in the picture. I think is really pretty much traceable back to the Epstein twins. But Howard Koch was very politically minded. And he also had a great deal of subtlety, I think, in his writing, and he managed to kind of work in those hints, the hints of Rick's past, the fact that he ran guns in Ethiopia and that he fought on the side of the loyalists in Spain. Those are just those little hints that help to show, wait a second, maybe this guy's going to change. Maybe those professions of neutrality, of only being concerned with himself, those are that's mere rhetoric, empty rhetoric. And so you have that. And as for the Epstein twins, I mean, I shouldn't discount their political engagement either, because they had, in fact, already been in Washington with Frank Capra on the production of the Why We Fight, Why We Fight series.
Yes,
they'd collaborated with Capra before,
right?
Arsenic and Old Lace, and I think there were other collaborations. But
with Peter Lorre,
I was speaking specifically about their decision against Jack Warner's admonition to go to DC and to work on the first installment of the Why We Fight series, Prelude to War, which they then helped to write. And that was, this is an award-winning documentary. It's a propaganda film. That's its main purpose. It was aimed at first screening to this enlisted servicemen, and to a lesser extent women at that time, but servicemen, and then to show to the broader public. And again, I mean, this was 1942, so there was still work to be done to convince people. The isolationist faction had not gone away.
Right. Yeah. People often forget how late America entered into the war. So Casablanca came out while there was still war.
Absolutely. I mean, it's really bound up in that whole story. I mean, the unproduced stage play, Everybody Comes to Rick's, by Murray Burnett and Joan Allison, arrives in Burbank a day after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And so from the very beginning, it's
tied inextricably to the war.
Absolutely. And even when Burnett and Allison wrote their stage play, that was based on Burnett's experience, as I write in the book, and Burnett's experience of being in Europe that fateful summer of '38, just
on vacation with his wife, correct?
Exactly. He was hoping for a belated honeymoon with his wife Frances.
Got a lot more than he bargained for.
Yes. Well put. He arrives in Antwerp in the summer of '38. They're instructed to go to Vienna and to help relatives of Frances, of Murray Burnett's wife, to smuggle out precious goods. Already at that time, under Nazi rule, Jews and other refugees were forbidden, but Jews specifically, from taking out any goods. This is part of the Aryanization.
Right.
And they managed to, the story that he tells, and I have to take. Yeah, I was going to say take him at his word here. Mm-hmm. His wife was wearing a fur. He's got jewels.
He's wearing the
cameras. And they board this train.
Sounds like maybe
Vienna's
maybe they were both in fur and heels.
Yeah, not exactly.
Like a scene out of
that's Billy Wilder.
Hot. Yeah.
Now we're on to Something Like It Hot. We're a few years ahead of ourselves. But anyway, he gets onto that train, and they make it to France. They managed to cross the lines into what then was still free France, not yet occupied, and they get to the Mediterranean, and they go to this bar on the bluffs. This is the road to Monte Carlo on the bluffs above Nice, and At the piano is a black crooner from Chicago, and the clientele is, people of all political persuasions and all backgrounds, and a babble of foreign tongues being spoken. And Murray allegedly turned to his wife on the spot and said, "This would make a great place for great location for a play." Anyway, he writes that play together with Joan Allison, and it's already, I think, capturing that wartime spirit.
There's an immediacy, of course, about making a film version anyway, because it's first of all, it's fast.
Yeah,
and it reaches more people so quickly than a play would.
Yeah, and they had trouble. I mean, they were hoping. They both come out of a strong theatrical background. Murray Burnett was an aspiring playwright. Joan Allison had already a couple plays under her belt, and was very well connected in the larger, sort of wider New York theater scene. And they initially were hoping. Again, this is sort of it's the old sort of highbrow intellectual investment in the theater over the movies, and I think that they shared some of that. Paul Henry talks about this in his memoir, Ladies' Man, about how for him it was all about the stage. He grew up with that. That was the sort of the premium. That was the gold standard was the stage, and it was really kind of selling out when you went to the movies. But Paul Henry
would
exactly
play Victor Laszlo in the film.
Exactly. And I think that Murray Burnett and Joan Allison, they too felt, especially as New Yorkers, and coming of age at the time they did. Murray Burnett was still young. He'd only graduated from Cornell a few years earlier. He was working as a high school English teacher in Midtown Manhattan. Joan Allison was about a decade his senior, was a divorcee, had children. And but for both of them, I think that the New York theater scene, that was really where they saw their future.
Well, imagine what the New York theater scene was like back then.
Yeah.
It was, it wasn't just rehashed musicals.
No.
They were making them then.
Or successful films that then became...
And there was as much theater as there may be today, there was probably umpteen as much. I mean, there was probably way more theater going on back then because...
I think so, and I think that if you did make a mark on Broadway, I think that the sort of the meteoric rise to celebrity status was much greater. I think now, in the many decades since then, we look to Hollywood for our celebrities, and especially among the writers. I mean, I think there were some playwrights in Broadway. I mean, not only working on Broadway but working elsewhere in the wider New York theater scene, who really were household names. And I think that Murray Burnett and Joan Allison initially held hope that they too would follow that career trajectory. And when the play did not get any takers on or even off Broadway, they had their agent send it to several studios. Warner Brothers snapped it up, but it was at MGM, it was at Paramount, and there are different stories as to the response at both of those studios. But Warner Brothers, it was mainly the work of Irene Lee, who was in the head of the story department at Warner's. She was the one who really first advocated for the play and its adaptation at Warner Brothers. She's the one who went to Hal Wallace and said, "I think we've got something here." And Hal Wallace took to it really very quickly.
One of the more intriguing aspects of the book, which again is called "We'll Always Have Casablanca: The Life, Legend, and Afterlife of Hollywood's Most Beloved Movie," written by Noah Isenberg and published by Norton Press. One of the things that I found the most interesting and intriguing in the book is more about, I think I'd heard about the differences. I'm a great listener of Karina Longworth's podcast, and so I kind of listened to that. It helped to educate me a little bit about the differences between the different studios at the time, MGM and Warner Brothers, RKO, and
she's great.
Yeah,
I mean,
she's terrific, and I recommend that podcast. I have in the past on mine.
So a plug for "You Must Remember This," which of course
that's right.
We know
the
the title.
Of her
Exactly.
podcast. Thank you for reminding me about that too. Or another connection between the book and that podcast. But specifically, Warner Brothers was more outspoken. The Warner Brothers, literally the Warner Brothers. I mean, who ran Warner Brothers, the studio, were Jewish immigrants themselves, as were most of the studio heads,
the vast majority.
And so they saw lots of their family members back in your parish, so they had a conviction, a strong conviction. And I found that really fascinating, that part of the book, because before, when we were talking about, when I was breaking down the categories that this film could fall under romance, under certainly wartime story, and but it's also a refugee story. I wanted to say that's so important aspect of this story. And you made reference to all the characters in the book, the main characters, as well as many of the minor characters, supporting characters of in the film, and that's.
It's a staggering figure. I think it's something along the lines of 85 of those who actually received a credit in the picture. Only 3 of them were native-born Americans.
And that's
Bogart, Julie Wilson, and Joy Page.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Joy Page played...
She plays Anina Brandl, the Bulgarian refugee.
Okay. She plays a refugee,
and she was, yes, of course she plays a refugee. And she was...
They're all
and
refugees,
ironically, the refugees, they're a number of them, of course, are stuck playing Nazis, which was a very common...
You mean like Austrian and German actors that had escaped
fled
Nazi
and
Europe.
Voiced opposition to Nazism, arrive in Hollywood and
play Nazis
and
are stereotyped.
A nasty, ironic twist of history end up.
It was an opportunity to own the pain, own the it's nothing better than.
Conrad Veidt specifically, who plays Major Strasser in the picture, was very, very, I think, adamant and extremely decent, no question about that. But also was adamant about his ability to portray the insidious nature of the Nazi regime and his embodiment of Major Strasser. I think he does it with such conviction, and this is somebody who knew it firsthand. He and his then wife, he was married to a Hungarian-born stage actor named Lily Prager, and Jewish, and they had left, and already in 1933, so just after the Nazis came to power, and they wanted Conrad Veidt, of course, to stay and work for the regime. He was asked to fill out papers, and on the papers,
one of my favorite anecdotes.
On the papers, he writes of his religion. He writes Jude, he writes Jew,
and big bold letters,
big bold letters, and
sticking it in their face.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And he wasn't Jewish, but I think that was almost like the Danish king wearing an armband. This was a moment of deep defiance and of real noble convictions, and he, Paul Henreid as well. I mean, these were people who were not going to stay around in Germany, even though they could have had a pretty successful career. I'd be ventured to guess, had they made that choice.
Yeah.
And so they end up in Hollywood, and I mean, yes, Henreid ends up playing Victor Laszlo, so he has a very noble role to play as this leader of this great underground movement. But Conrad Veidt ends up as Major Strasser. Otto Preminger, an Austro-Hungarian Jewish actor and famously a great Hollywood director, was brought in to test for Major Strasser as well. And a lot of the minor Nazi characters in the film were played by those who fled the regime, either for ethnic or political reasons, or in the case of Heinrich von Twardowski, who plays the Nazi that marches into Rix with Yvonne on his arm late in the film, in the third act, when she comes back to Rix, this time having turned against after being snubbed by Rick at the bar and being forced to be taken home by Sasha. She returns on the arm of a Nazi, and that's played by Twardowski, who was out already as homosexual and was therefore persecuted by the regime. And he comes to Hollywood, and he ends up playing a Nazi.
Could you come out because there was during that brief period before Nazi Germany, there was Weimar.
Exactly, the Weimar Republic.
There was this period of time where it was safe to.
Yes, more or less. I mean, there was paragraph 175, but yes,
I am a camera.
There was in the Constitution. There was paragraph 175, and that stipulated, basically it deprived homosexuals of their rights, and it was more or less in place, I guess. More than less in place during the Weimar years, and yet the Weimar years had a kind of long gasp of sort of libertine behavior and of not, I think, enforcing certain laws. And, basically it was more of a sort of a don't ask, don't tell kind of situation where many gay men and women living, especially in the cities, in particular in Berlin, I think lived a relatively happy and harmonious existence during that short-lived experiment in democracy known as the Weimar Republic.
But even just, I was thinking socially, it just wasn't dangerous socially.
No.
Like
they were
never mind from the, let's say the regime, but I'm talking about just even on a peer level.
Yes. I think so. I think people were relatively accepting and open-minded.
Not happening here, but it seemed in the from what I've seen.
I think people have written about this. I think we're comparatively much more open-minded during the Weimar years in Germany than on these shores, for sure. But then, of course, the Nazis came to power in January of 1933, and with the implementation of the Nuremberg laws and other restrictions, the persecution of homosexuals alongside Jews and Gypsies and Roma and Sinti, as they're now known, and other political subversives. I mean, that was then, that was enforced. It wasn't. No one was turning a blind eye to that from 1933 onward.
So I think the listeners now will start getting an idea that the book is essentially giving a lot of context to the origin story of Casablanca, and from insemination from when it was a play to when it became a film, and then its effect on the public, and its lasting effect also, and how it's still to this day, 75 years later, because this is being published on its 75th anniversary.
Correct.
2017 or something.
That's right. That's our year now.
Yeah.
Hard as it may be to believe. But yes, I mean,
amazing.
If I could just respond briefly, as briefly as I can, as an otherwise windy academic, this was a project that enabled me to kind of draw on two facets of my background. One is a film historian, so I had the chance to kind of go through and track. And Algine Hermetz really wrote a wonderful book about the making of, and I'm enormously indebted to her and credit her.
This was in the 90s?
This was in the 92. It first came out. Round Up the Usual Suspects, this was the original title. And it was re-released so that was the 50th anniversary, and then the 60th it came out again in 2002. And she does a great job, and I follow some of her moves. One would have to, everyone who's come after her would have to. But I wanted to basically to account for the transition that you just described from the unproduced stage play to the screenplay to the film, and then its reception and all that went into it. Again, context key throughout. But then the other side that I want to bring to the table is that my training in German studies and the extensive research that I conducted, particularly on those refugees and emigres and exiles who suddenly were located in what was known as Weimar on the Pacific, as it came to be known during the 1940s in Hollywood of the 40s. And so, yes, that central chapter, Such Much, which comes from the dialogue of that endearing elderly couple en route to America. Yeah. That's a chapter that in many ways anchors the book for me, and I think it anchors the story. And we were talking a while ago about the subtlety of the writing, the subtlety of the different stories told on screen as well. And beneath that surface is really that refugee story. It's not always front and center. There are little glimpses that we catch of it, even when people are being rounded up in those sort of raids at the very beginning. When we have it's Paul Andor who's the actor who's the refugee who's asked for his papers and then takes off and is shot in the back.
Oh yes.
And we have Marshal Patin and then also the liberté, fraternité, fraternité. Anyway, the motto of the French Republic. I think I may have botched the order there.
I can fix it in post.
And from that moment onward, you really catch these various glimpses of that refugee experience, and I wanted to spend a considerable amount of the time in the book kind of fleshing that out, because I felt that we think of this movie more than anything else as one of Hollywood's greatest romances and one of its greatest wartime dramas. But I think we often forget or just don't know about the origins of the story and all of those kind of fleeting glimpses that we catch in the film that are so fast. And Curtiz was known for his extraordinary efficiency.
Well, with the necessary time dilutes the story. We can't imagine how. I'm sure back then it didn't escape the public imagination that this was a refugee story, considering that it was wartime still, and that many people were refugees and had come to wherever safe passage. Right. It was everybody's story.
But it was also one of those things, if you think specifically of the ethnic background of many of these refugees, many of them were Jews, at least nominally so.
Sure.
Even if they didn't identify first and foremost as Jews during the Weimar years, when I think many of them thought...
They became Jews when all of a sudden their lives were in danger.
Yeah, exactly.
Not because of anything bad or trying to disassociate from their Jewish background, but how many of us walk around claiming, we're Jewish when we meet somebody.
Right. And so, and in the movie, because this is a Hollywood picture from the first half of the 1940s. As Andre Aciman, one of the many dozen of people that I interviewed for this book, he's a terrific writer, novelist, critic. He says, the Jews, they're all over the screen, but not in the story, and there is that kind of implicit presence, but it's not explicit. This is basically from the time between the jazz singer and gentleman's agreement, you don't do that. You don't. And so we knew, and in fact, in the various debates, on the floors of Congress and elsewhere across the country, we knew the ethnic background of the vast majority of these refugees. And yet, in a movie like Casablanca, of course, that's not addressed. And I don't do any sort of retroactive, moralistic reading of the film, and from this vantage point of 2017, how could Hollywood have been so cowardly as not to? I mean, that just wasn't done, and you couldn't. I mean, I'm not taking Warner Brothers to task. I think it was a very courageous picture to make. Period.
Yeah, and often Jews, when they were trying to be quote unquote subtle about portraying Jewish characters in a lot of films, the giveaway is often kind of insulting. It might be in their demeanor or their maybe Semitic look or behavior of some sort, which is kind of insulting the stereotypes that are often used. Sure. Here you have to almost kind of give them credit because, again, while they are trying to be still trying to be subtle in this film, they give them a lot of humanity.
Absolutely.
And, I think
that
even
goes
the
pickpocket, even Kurt Bois, who plays and he's called in the script, he's called the dark European, is the way he's referred to on the screenplay. But Kurt Bois, who's the pickpocket, and there's vultures everywhere.
Yes, it's
he has. I mean, it's a very, very small role, and he, of course, complained about it bitterly afterwards, and was like so many of the previously well-known stage actors and sort of eminences from Europe had real trouble finding fully developed roles. But even in this small role, he does have the humor is there, and the humanity. I mean, I think there's a later exchange when he's in Rick's and he bumps into Carl Cuddles, into Essie Sakal, who is known on these shores as Cuddles, the Hungarian-born cabaret actor, the jovial, jowly waiter at Rick's Cafe. He bumps into him, and Carl immediately reaches for his valise, or not his whatever it would have been, his wallet in his pocket there.
Right.
And there's a very funny moment there too. So I mean, he doesn't have a major part, but it's not vulgar. It's not.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, it's not a caricature or a stereotype. Ironically, the notion of Jews as thieves, and I mean, there may be some layers deeper there, but in this case, it's a moment of levity, and that's. I mean, if we go back to Carl, the waiter, Cuddles, he too is there, and he was a great cabaret actor first in Budapest and then in Vienna, and had been a film actor as well, in addition to appearing on the stage. A lot of his moments are there to I think endow the film with again another level of humanity, of warmth. It's no coincidence that he was known as Cuddles. I mean, you basically just want to go up to this guy and give him, and he of course gives Rick that hug at the end after Rick allows Jan Brandl, the Bulgarian refugee, to put all his chips on 22, or tells him to put them on 22, and ends up winning at the roulette table. Carl, is among the first to give him again, and of course it's Sasha, the crazy Russian, who comes over and gives Rick a kiss, gives Bogey a kiss. But I mean, these characters, again, if we come back to sort of just the textured, again, the layers of these foreign-born actors, they give that film an extraordinary authenticity, and that's. I was talking to someone yesterday about this. That is one of the most remarkable accomplishments of the film, if you think about it. I mean, it's made on the sound stages of Warner Brothers in Burbank, California.
Right.
It's nowhere near this North African outpost, and yet it manages to convey a feel, a sound, a flavor of that world. And one of the ways in which it does it most effectively is by having this deep, deep cast of foreign-born actors. It was none other than Pauline Kael who said that she was interviewed by Elgin Harmetz, and she commented that she were it not for these foreign-born actors, we'd really have trouble believing it.
Right.
If you the interview, I think, was from the 80s, if I'm not mistaken, and if you were to picture then or even today, some decades later, having these Hollywood actors play these roles, and this may be one they've flirted so many times of doing a sequel. Right, exactly. Yeah. I shake my head as well. Yeah. The listeners can't see us shaking our heads, but we're shaking our heads. But one of the reasons you can't do that, I think, is because it would be very difficult to get that sense of authenticity and the timeliness.
Although the timeliness is there, now you can just relocate the story.
Yeah,
to any number of places.
I would agree with you. I think that it hasn't lost any of its timeliness. The basic message of the film, and the need to do right, and the need to support those who are persecuted and who've been dealt a worse hand than you. I mean, those are all really important messages, and those are, I think, kind of core archetypes of or even foundational myths, I think, of America. But I think that it hasn't lost any of its timeliness. That's a point that, again, going back to some of the interviews that I conducted, it was Leonard Maltin who spoke with me a bit about that, Lou Lumenick, and then Janine Basinger, who said that the film is so much of its moment and yet also utterly timeless. And I think that's true. I attribute that observation to her. It may have been one of the others as well. I mean, a number of people chimed in, and the comments that they made, I think, often looped back to that notion about the picture being so much of the moment, of America's entry into the Second World War, and yet it being completely timeless. And that's what I think accounts for our ability to watch it 75 years later and get just as much pleasure, if not more pleasure, out of it than audiences were doing from Thanksgiving Day 1942 onward.
And Bogart.
And that
just
guy.
Bogart. Yeah. You despise me. Don't you, Rick?
Right. Well, yeah, Laurie, even though he's in and out of the picture in the first reel, is as one of the contemporary critics from 1942-43 wrote, he leaves that indelible memory on you. I mean, you will never forget Ugarte, and you will never forget the comment that you just made when he turns to him and oh, that's right, Rick. What right do I have to think? And these sorts of this is his wonderful obsequious, kind of picking up on Joel Cairo from Maltese Falcon and taking him to 11, basically. Joel Cairo on steroids.
Rick, watching you just now with the Deutsche Bank, one would think you've been doing this all your life.
What makes you think I haven't?
Oh, nothing. But when you first came to Casablanca, I thought...
You thought what?
What right do I have to think? Too bad about those two German couriers, wasn't it?
They got a lucky break. Yesterday, they were just two German clerks. Today, they're honored dead.
You're a very cynical person, Rick, if you forgive me for saying so.
I'll forgive you.
Thank you. Will you have a drink with me, please?
No.
Oh, I forgot you never drink with any... I'll have another, please.
Yes, monsieur.
You despise me, don't you?
Well, if I gave you any thought, I probably would.
But Bogey was so important, needless to say, not only for the film at its time period, but also for the revival. In 1957, soon after he passed away in Cambridge, Massachusetts, at the Brattle Theater, that's really when the revivals began.
Yeah,
when the
it sounds
revivals
like
began.
It sounds like they're coming to get us.
Yeah.
You know.
When the revivals, exactly. I'm not sure whether that's a German, what is it, B-78 bomber out there, or is that my heart pounding? I'm not sure. Anyway, but
at the Brattle Theater in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Programmer there. What was his name? What's his name?
Well, there are two programmers, and one of whom had been a Fulbright fellow in France in the
Harvey.
50s. Yeah, so it's Cyrus Harvey.
Bryant.
And both Harvey and Halliday had the idea of this, what they called the Bogart Festival, that they would do.
It's a great idea.
It was a terrific idea, as it turns out. I'm not sure they were aware of it at the time, but Bogart had just recently passed, and they decided to do a festival, the cornerstone of which would be a screening of Casablanca.
Mm-hmm.
And the students at Harvard and Radcliffe, they developed an incredible devotion to this festival that would take place each year during the reading and exam period. And so there was a lot of downtime, as the poet Honor Moore explained to me. I interviewed a number of people who were at Harvard then, and Todd Gitlin, Gene Strauss, Honor Moore. And it was Honor Moore who told me that explained that you had a lot of...
I hope everybody's okay.
Yes. So during the reading period and exam week at Harvard and Radcliffe in Cambridge, Massachusetts, students who were studying around the clock, they had a lot of pent-up energy and were looking for some sort of release, some sort of an outlet.
This is perfect.
And the Bogart Festival that the programmers at the Brattle, they provided a forum for students to come, and they did. They would come over and over again, and they would shout out the line. Some of them would come dressed in
30 years ago. I came to Cambridge, and I would exactly 30 years later, or just about 30 years later, and I would remember seeing Rocky Horror Picture Show in Cambridge for the first time, and same idea.
Exactly.
Same,
well, that's what's interesting. It's funny. I liken it because the cult status that Casablanca has earned over the years, I think, is in strange ways analogous to. They're very, very different films, no doubt. But I mean, in terms of the spectatorship. I mean, in terms of going to these movies dressed in character. They're not throwing rice or putting up their umbrellas, but they're shouting out lines. Mm-hmm. And there's that same kind
interactive.
Yeah, very much so. And that's increasingly so.
Right.
I mean, it was definitely one of its most acute manifestations was during the 50s and 60s at Harvard and Radcliffe, and then on the West Coast at Stanford. Apparently, there was a sort of offshoot. But in the meantime, you have these, as recently as I think it's last year, the year before, Secret Cinema in London, where they at the Troxy Theatre, where they built a Rick's Cafe within the theater, and you had not only actors who were dressed in character, but you had the spectators who purchased tickets came
in costume,
and it's become increasingly interactive in that regard. I mean, I think that's known. These are different, more immersive forms of cinema.
Yeah, right.
And
I think, it seems like it's the next level of cinema in the United States is immersive cinema, which is maybe winding down a little bit.
Sure.
We're talking with Noah Isenberg, who's the author of We'll Always Have Casablanca, which is published by Norton Press and available now where books are sold. And I recommend it. It was a lot of fun reading this book.
Thank you.
I think I probably got through it in primarily 2 sessions. That's how.
Wow.
And I knew I was meeting with you, so
it's a very nice compliment. I'll take it. Thank you. I like any suggestion of page turner. I like.
It is. It's just so much fun. I was going to ask you earlier, but I think that how there's a sense of scholarship to it, but this is a very accessible book too. I mean, this is for any fans of cinema or the movie or Bogart or whomever you're way in. I just wanted to also mention Claude Rains is outstanding, and though we haven't brought him up, and Peter Lorre, some of my favorite actors, Sidney Greenstreet, who's not a refugee,
though foreign born,
right? He was British.
And even
was he British?
Peter Lorre, yes, he was British,
right?
As was Rains.
And I love his comment when he's going through the commissary and he overhears some people speaking, I think Hungarian or something. And he goes, "Don't you know don't you know, guys, this is Hollywood. You should be speaking German.
Yeah, that's Preminger. It's Preminger.
Oh, it was
that line.
Otto
No, it's a
Preminger?
great comment, but it's Preminger. That would be even funnier, though, if it were Green Street.
Yes. Yeah.
But it was funny enough with it being Preminger. That's quoted in Otto Friedrich's great history of Hollywood in the 40s.
It's a great line.
Yeah. But I'm delighted that you feel that way. This was an aim, no doubt, from the very beginning of writing this book for popular audience, for a non-academic audience.
It would be a misstep not to,
Yeah,
because, I mean, truthfully, this is really, even though we mentioned two Ivy League schools that made this into a party, but it was really the country. I mean, speaking of America, it was the movie that brought us together. I mentioned before, I also went to the Brattle quite a bit during the 80s when I was in Cambridge.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to Harvard.
Yeah, that's okay. Don't worry.
I was going to another school.
Yeah,
But it was during the years where they brought back, after some legal delays, they brought back Alfred Hitchcock's American films from the late 50s, including Vertigo, Rear Window, The Trouble with Harry, and The Man Who Knew Too Much.
Yeah, that would make sense.
I'm trying to remember. And Rope.
There were like 4 or 5. Man Who Knew Too Much has a great Peter Lorre. If you got to follow all the Peter Lorre pictures, Man Who Knew Too Much is.
Well, I did, and then of course there was also in
you mentioned Arsenic and Olace.
Yeah.
No, Johnny, please, no, Johnny, no, Johnny, please, don't do it, John.
Yes,
really
fast. What?
You're very
I worked
good.
on it. Yeah. Way too much. I was the only 10-year-old probably who was doing Peter Lorre impressions, and
that's a good impression, though, I have to say.
Thank you. And then Elaine, I'm not a Brewster. I'm not a Brewster.
Not bad.
When he discovers he's
not bad.
Yeah, that's another book.
Definitely.
They brought those back, and I watched them, and of course, Vertigo now is considered by critics alike, to be the number one film when you read all the polls. Is usually now at the top, with, I think, usually
Citizen Kane.
Right underneath now.
Citizen Kane
from number 1 spot to number 2.
Yeah.
But somewhere in the top 5 or so, you're going to find Casablanca.
Oh,
Maybe
yeah,
in the top
and
10.
I engage
But
in that
I
debate
still
a bit
think-
in the book, but it's a kind of a tedious debate. When
It
you
is
think
a tedious
about it, in
debate.
the sense that you have, of course, especially among the old cinephiles, or what today we'd simply call, I think, film geeks, you have the need, I think, to flex your muscle and to align yourself with the films that are obviously formally much more ambitious and stylistically more accomplished, more sort of virtuoso, and also, kind of, we're still reliant on the auteurist model, I think.
Sure, right.
And whether it's Hitchcock or
Curtiz,
Wells, those are two of the
Curtiz,
most towering.
not
Curtiz,
an auteur.
Not so much. The greatest,
studio,
the greatest exception
Studio,
to the auteur theory.
I was going to say
Sarah
hack.
said.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was going to say hack, but he's not.
No.
Curtiz was far from
But
that.
he'd be accused
he was,
of that.
But the
by
thing
certain
is,
auteurists.
I think the thing is, well, as you were mentioning, yes, the Citizen Kane, and of course any work by Hitchcock is going to always be looked at as a technical marvel on some level of all the technical prowess of these.
Right.
But what I like about the book, you're giving it more props than it's gotten. It's often not given the technical, or perhaps I don't want to say cerebral, but I would say that there is some just below the surface.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot more going on there, as we
That
I think
usually
talked
meets the
about
eye.
earlier today. First meets the eye, exactly. Which it's not normally. I don't read a lot about that. When Casablanca, it's a crowd pleaser.
Right.
So if you're talking about, I think that does unify the moviegoers, the average moviegoers who like maybe old movies, who like to watch old movies on the Turner Classic Movie Channel. This is the movie that is the one that comes up number 1.
Yeah, and for good reason. And in terms of that, I mean, look, I don't. I love Citizen Kane as much as the next cinephile, but in terms of that invidious comparison between the two, I think that Roger Ebert he did an audio commentary for the 2002 DVD release, and he says that, when asked what is the greatest picture of all time, he says Citizen Kane. I'm not sure I would say that necessarily, but he says it, which is fine. I respect it. What is the film that you like most? Casablanca. And so it's that pleasure aspect that definitely distinguishes the two.
That's a cheat, by the way. It's a cheat. It's like saying, I have to say this because I'm a critic.
Right, exactly. It is. And I don't feel.
And why choose?
I don't feel that that same necessity. I really don't. I feel like I can simply say that I enjoy Casablanca tremendously without needing to fear that people will, look at me with a kind of jaundiced eye, or look at me as if I were a lesser film scholar and a lesser critic, simply because I have a certain soft spot for what is obviously one of Hollywood's greatest and most beloved pictures.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. We're going to devote an episode of this podcast to Casablanca, 75th anniversary, and your book, which again, Norton Press, and available where books are sold, online or bricks
everywhere.
And mortar. Just go get a copy. Do yourself a favor. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you, Adam. I appreciate it.
It's been fun.
Great talking to you.